Hello and welcome to the webinar on diversifying education pathways, moving from exclusion to inclusion in education. This webinar is hosted by Educate a Child, a global program of the Education Above All Foundation. And we welcome you. Just a few housekeeping tidbits before we get started and get into the meat of the webinar. If you have questions that you want to raise during the session, please feel free to put those into the question and answers or section, and we will mark those down and try to get to them at the end of the session. There will be some time at the end for questions and answers. And we can also, if you would like to ask something directly, raise your hand and we can unmute you and allow you to speak. For those of you who are joining us in a language other than, would like to have closed caption translation in a language other than English, the entire webinar will be done in English, but there is some translation options. The instructions for how to access those are on the slide in front of you. Additionally, at the end of the webinar, we will share some QR codes with links to additional resources and publications if you would like to reference more information about what some of the panelists are discussing and more information on the topic today. We will also provide links to the bios of each of the panelists when we get to that later in the session. I don't know if there's a next slide. So, as I said, there are links to each of the bios of the panelists, but why are we here today? We're here because we are almost 35 years since the signing of the Yantian Declaration for the Universal Declaration on, or the Universal Access to Primary Education for All Children. More than 20 years, 25 years actually, since the Millennium Development Goals were agreed to in Dakar, and the signing of the declaration that all children should have access to primary education and a commitment on the global level to provide that access to every single child. 15 years ago in Incheon, Korea, we recommitted to ensuring inclusive access for all children and youth to education opportunities and lifelong learning. And yet 5 years from the deadline of meeting these targets, we are once again failing to come close to providing universal access to quality, inclusive, and equitable education for all children. It has become evident that if we do not start changing how we do things and how education is provided, that there is no way that we're going to be able to ensure education opportunities for the most marginalized. And these children are going to miss out on opportunities to contribute to social cohesion, to meet their full potential, and to help build societies and peaceful communities. So today we're bringing together a panel of experts who have supported diversifying education offers and ensuring inclusive education for all, influencing policy and practice at the country, regional, and global levels. We are joined today by Breivik, the Global Head of Strategic Partnerships at the Stromme Foundation, by Daniela Uresty, the lead of the Secretariat for the Regional Working Group for Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, and Tamara Jacod, who is the Global lead for Inclusive Education, Policy and Development at Humanity and Inclusion. Some of you may know it better as its former name of Handicap International, or as we like to say, HI. With that, there are a few things that we would like the panelists to address. What are some of the innovations? We're going to look at innovations that have been developed and how we make sure that we align with country policies. What are the challenges that they have faced in ensuring the uptake of these solutions by ministries of education at the country level, and what has worked? And then how can we as a global community, support the equitable and inclusive development of education systems while also diversifying the offer and reaching the most marginalized. With that, I would like to start with Tamara. Tamara, could you please tell us some of what Humanity Inclusion has been doing globally to support education innovations and to ensure inclusive and equitable education for the most marginalized? And how have you supported and ensured the alignment of these innovations within the countries that you work?
Thank you, Sabrina. At Humanity and Inclusion, one of the most effective innovation that has been used is our contextualized twin-track inclusive education models that simultaneously support individual children while also transforming the school and the community environment. And a key example of that model is the itinerant teacher model, which has been implemented and institutionalized in countries like Togo and Burkina Faso. In this approach, teachers with specialized training in disability inclusive pedagogy travel between mainstream schools to support both children with disabilities and their teachers. This model has helped children with moderate to severe disability access quality learning without necessarily needing to relocate to specialized schools. And it was integrated in Togo's national education sector plan with government-funded teacher posts. In Madagascar, we also successfully use bridging classes to prepare out-of-school children, including those with disabilities, to transition into inclusive classroom. And in Senegal, the deployment of school life assistants has provided these one-on-one in-school support to children with higher support needs. What's critical in making these models effective is the holistic kind of multi-sectoral approach, linking education with health, with protection, and education with social inclusion. At HI, it's not just about enrollment. It's about ensuring children stay in school, learn, and thrive. We're also exploring new tech-enabled innovation, like one of our projects right now in the Middle East called the ATSA project, which uses 360-degree cameras to remotely share inclusive education practices across borders, which aims to overcome the mobility restriction due to some geopolitical challenges. This is quite a simple yet powerful way to scale peer learning between inclusive education specialists and capacity building, both like at a regional level and with the potential of a global level. In short, what has proven most effective is adapting inclusive strategies to each context. So we're not responding the same way in Togo than we are in Burkina, that we are in the Middle East and in Madagascar, for example, and anchoring them in community and government systems from the very get-go, from day one, and ensuring they respond to real barriers children face. And that means having that collaboration with the communities in which we work. And these barriers can be physical, attitudinal, or like systemic. So we respond at a very different level in a multi-sectoral way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm really hearing ensuring contextualization of the offer and the approaches, looking at multi-sectoral approaches, because the barriers and the issues that are facing some of the most excluded are not just what's happening in the classroom, but that need to be addressed on a multi-sectoral basis among really varying types or individualizing some of the approaches and offers. This is very inspiring. Anne, in 2004, Stromme Foundation and your partners started to develop the speed school model in Mali, and then it spread to Burkina Faso and Niger. Would you please talk to, this has been a model that has really taken hold in these countries. Could you please talk a little bit to the model and how Stromme and partners worked to ensure alignment with government priorities and policies in the development of this model? Like what is the model? How's it work? And how are we ensuring government alignment with the model?
Yes, thank you so much, Sabrina. Yeah, so the speed school model was developed as a solution for out of school children aged 8 to 12 that were deemed too old to directly enroll in primary school. And it's an accelerated education program. So it covers the first 3 years of primary school in 9 months. And upon completion of the program, children then transfer into formal schools to continue their education, usually at the 4th grade level. And maybe a bit similar to what Tamara's touched upon, it's very much a community-anchored solution. It's low cost and it's low tech. It's done in temporary learning centers, small learning groups, 25 to 30 learners, use of mother language the first 2 months before transferring into French, which is the language of instruction in the 3 countries. And the local community is directly involved in the management of the centers. And this has given very strong results with taking children never been to school before, 90% complete, and about 95% of them then transfer to formal school to continue. And for Stromme Foundation, it's always very important, irrespective of where we work, that all our education programs are fully anchored with the respective education systems that we work towards. For the Speed School program, it was essential to collaborate with the government. First of all, with the target group, ensuring we only reach the ones overaged and that there was agreement with the government around that. So we didn't become an alternative to the formal schools. Secondly, we used a condensed curriculum for the program that's based on the national curriculum. So we needed the collaboration and input in the design. And thirdly, upon the completion, they are transferred to government schools. So to facilitate that, we needed that collaboration and engagement. And we worked very closely, both at the national level with the Ministry of Education, but also very importantly at the decentralized technical services level, as it's called in the 3 countries, to develop and review the curriculum. But the decentralized technical services are also a part of the implementation. So while centers are run by local NGOs, the animators, the teachers that we use, they are trained by the government pedagogical advisors. They also help monitor the centers, and then teachers from the host schools where the children transfer are involved in setting the final test that assess the level of where they transfer. So it's been integral from the start to ensure that our program is a complementary. It's providing access into the government system, not a parallel system. Thank you.
This is great. So I'm really hearing some key points coming across all of the strategies and innovations and community buy-in and local ownership is coming across throughout that. And maybe we can hear a little bit later on how the model has evolved in order to reach more children and other diversified groups of youth and others. Daniela, you have a view towards a regional context in your role at the Secretariat for the Regional Working Group for Education in Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit on what you've seen the various countries in the region and taking this regional view, how they have worked to diversify the offer for those who are the most marginalized, who may either be pushed out of school due to their circumstances or aren't accessing learning, and how they've worked to really change the education offer to support marginalized and vulnerable populations in the region.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think there has been some very interesting insights from Tamara and Anne, and my intervention is going to be more at the regional level. So I would start with a little bit of context, because I see that here we have people from all over the world, but probably you don't have this information about Latin America and the Caribbean. We are the most unequal region in the world, and that says a lot. What does this mean? So of course, is that we have a huge gap between the richest and the poorest. And this means for governments and ministries of education that they have a lot of pressure to give an answer for these students, these children and adolescents that live in the most marginalized side of these groups, right? So what we can find is very interesting examples. We do have, in most of the countries, national programs. We do have strategies. We do have several local initiatives, similar to what Anne just mentioned. And especially what we can see is in at least 3 types of programming. So the first one is on rural education, and this is basically for primary. We can see that in countries such as Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which have around 40 to 50% of their population living in rural communities. So this is very important. We do also have multilingual education, and this is basically for countries with diverse groups. And we have here Guatemala, Bolivia, and Peru, and they need to have this education, right? So these models, they tend to be very flexible, and they tend to be also to be given in the language, the local language. And we also have a lot of programming in secondary education. We have some of the dropout tasas. Sorry, I missed the word, but we have a lot of children that are leaving this level. And what we have here is that there is a big socioeconomic gap between the children that are in the poorest group and the children that are in the richest. So secondary education flexibility, this is definitely something that needs to be targeted, and it's actually being targeted. So we are seeing all these examples in the region, but definitely one of the most important ones, and that I wanted to highlight in this conversation, is the one of Colombia. So you probably heard that Colombia has a program that is called Accelerated Education Models. These models were built in the 70s, and Colombia has managed, even though this programming has around 50 years, it has managed to maintain itself quite flexible and to be quite innovative also to respond to the needs and the challenge that the country is facing. Some of the things that are very important about this flexible education initiative is that they help children in vulnerable situations to stay in schools. And this is mainly targeted to migrant children, to internally displaced children, and also to children that are overage. They have several models, but most of them, what they do is that they help the children to catch up. So most of them, they support to catch up between 2 or 3 grades, depending on the model, in just 1 year. So what does this helps children to get into normal schools, right? This is basically for primary and secondary students. And also and I believe this is also very interesting, is that Colombia has a flexible curriculum that is something that other countries don't have. So this is just possible because of this flexibility. So I would say basically this. So just to grab up a little, governments, they see the need there because the population, it's impossible not to see it, right? The population is there. And also the thing is that we have some of these initiatives, and the only thing that we need to see is that to improve them, because they are already implemented in national systems. So basically, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So just as right before we move on, I'd like to come back in on just what the one for each of you quickly, starting with Anne, and then Tamara and Daniela. What are the 1 or 2 things that you think we should keep in mind as we look to develop flexible alternative education pathways that are aligned with national priorities and systems?
Maybe it's a bit simple to say it, but I think the need to adapt to the children, to the learner. I mean, to have this variety of solutions. And I think it's really interesting what Daniela is saying, this flexibility that the curriculum in Colombia has, that really should be something to take forward. I also think, and maybe we'll come back to this later as well, I think there's a distinction between perhaps primary and secondary, and particularly the challenges around that adolescents face, and that these need very different solutions as well. Thanks.
And I'm going to give Daniela and Tamara, or Tamara and Daniela in that order, 30 seconds each. Quickly, anything to add from what Anne just, Anne's observations?
Absolutely. I'll try to be as quick as possible. I think when we think about flexible pathways to education, we need to make sure that it includes every children, including children with disability. And I'll cheat a little bit and I'll say a second thing really quick. I also think that it cannot be creating parallel system. It needs, as Anne and Daniela have been mentioning, needs to be integrated within national policy and education policy. So that's on me. Yeah.
Daniela, quickly, anything else to add?
Yeah, probably political willness. I would say that that's something that it's very relevant, and also legal frameworks, so that these flexible models are recognized and actually integrated into the legal frameworks, because that is going to make children actually, guarantee that they can go to schools.
Perfect. And so you've really already helped me segue into the next piece or the next topic that we want to address. It's one thing to really develop these flexible approaches and to implement them, but in order for them to go to scale and reach the most children possible and really get to all of the vulnerable and marginalized children, they need to be taken in or uptaken by the ministries of education and become not outside the system, but a part of the system. So starting, Daniela, with you, if you could talk to what you have seen work in the region in terms of countries and ministries really adopting and integrating some of the approaches you talked about into their national education systems.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. So I would just like to go a little bit deeper on what I've just said about this legal framework, because it's very, very relevant. What we have in the region is that most countries, they do recognize that these children are there. We have Afro-descendant, indigenous population. We have also internally displaced people, especially in countries that have a lot of violence. So for example, Colombia, Mexico, and some countries also in Central America. So we do have legal frameworks to attend those populations. The problem is that even though the laws are there, they're not necessarily being taken into account. Sometimes they are even ignored. But I would like to see the good part of this, right? The thing is that we do have those systems that are strong enough, and that might be something that is different from other regions probably, that at least in here, we do have the resources and we do have these systems that could embrace flexible education. So I think that's very relevant. I would also like to mention that in the last GEM report on diversity, it was found that 60% of the countries did have an inclusive education policy in most of these countries, and they include like a broader definition on what disability, ethnicity, and gender means. So all of the three in 60% of the countries. And that's something that is very relevant. But how do we bring like all these beautiful words and beautiful things that are happening into the ground? I think that's exactly where we want to have these kinds of discussions and work with NGOs and with foundations to actually make this happen.
Perfect, thank you. I think, yeah, these are ensuring the policy level uptake is extremely important. And on that note, Tamara, I'd like to come to you because HI is known to work at the grassroots and community level to implement innovative solutions, working with local education actors and district education actors, but at the same time working on policy at the national and regional levels. So you have, I've noticed a grassroots or a bottom-up, top-down kind of merged approach. Can you talk about what has worked for you in supporting those innovations that take place at the community and at the school level to be uptaken by ministries of education, as well as getting the policies that have been implemented at the national levels to really trickle down and actually be implemented at the local level?
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. I think this is a crucial question for the sustainability of any of innovation. And I think both Anne and Daniela kind of touch on some key points. And at Humanity and Inclusion, one of our key lessons has been that ministry uptake or national uptake doesn't happen by accident. It has to be built deliberately from the start. And I'd like to really quickly point out 3 strategies that have been particularly effective at HI. First, we work with governments as partners from day one. For example, in Togo, we piloted the innovation I spoke earlier about, the itinerant teacher model, on the condition that the ministry second teachers into the pilot, not just observe it. By embedding government staff directly into the innovation, we built both ownership and credibility. And over time, this has helped will lead to full institutionalization. In Togo right now, the itinerant teacher model is now part of the national education plan with government paid posts. And second, we align our innovation with existing system. And I think that was already mentioned by both Anne and Daniela, not to create this parallel system. So we align our innovation with existing system, structures, and sector plans. For example, in Burkina Faso and Madagascar, we didn't create these parallel structures. We built on what was already there. So in Burkina Faso, we linked the itinerant teacher support with existing specialized schools and involved education advisor, local governments, and communities in the design and the rollout. That alignment made it easier for ministry to scale the approach and also justify its place in the national strategies. And third, we cultivate long-term relationships and work at both grassroots and institutional level, as you mentioned, Sabrina. In many countries where HI has worked for decades, like Burkina Faso and Togo, our sustained presence means we're not just a temporary project. We provide technical support over time, co-develop inclusive education modules for teacher training, contribute to disability inclusive data and EMIS systems, and support national policy reform. So we help the government build the infrastructure that is needed and the capacity that is needed to own the solution. One more enabling factor, I think that wasn't quite mentioned, is timing. When ministries are updating their education sector plans, we make sure that inclusive education solution proven at grassroots levels are positioned as ready to scale models. This window has been really key at HI to embedding inclusive innovation into these national commitment and budget. So briefly to sum up, partnership from the beginning, system alignment, sustained presence, and ideally seizing policy windows are what has enabled ministries to not only uptake, but truly integrate inclusive education solutions into the national systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we can all take those lessons learned and move them forward as we look to support countries in diversifying their education offer. And one of the things that Tamara just pointed on was engagement of government from the beginning. And I know that's one of the key aspects that Stromme had in the Speed School model. Can you speak to what worked and how the Speed School model has now been integrated and is now a systemic part of the ministries of education in all 3 countries where it was originally piloted, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and what some of the challenges were in doing that along the way.
Yes, no, as Tamara was just mentioning, you know, working with government from day one is key. But we saw that, you know, we've done that in the development and implementation, but in order to take it to scale and ensure sustainability, we also had to anchor the coordination and the quality assurance at the government level. Stromme Foundation is a relatively small Norwegian international development NGO in the big picture. You know, this needs to be anchored at the government level to take it further. And to do that, we took the lead to develop what we called a sub-regional speed school secretariat. And that was back in 2010, which brought together the ministries of education in the 3 countries, together with the local NGO partners and Stromme Foundation. And we established collaboration both at the technical level, but also at ministerial level. And we had ministerial level meetings each year. And we even brought the ministers, education ministers, to Norway at some point. And I think this is touching on what Daniela was also saying around this of creating the political will. The reason why we had such a focus on that was that we wanted to position the issue, the out-of-school children, as well as positioning the ministers of education vis-a-vis the rest of the ministers in their respective cabinet. Because one of the ministers said during one of these meetings that, you know, how can I argue for funds for out-of-school children when the children in school don't have enough books? You know, this of just lifting this issue. And to facilitate that, we also need to highlight the support and the collaboration we've had from the Norwegian development agency NORAD from the start, both in developing the program, but also to help fund this anchoring and institutionalization. Because, you know, more bureaucracy isn't quite what donors are after, but here it was needed to establish that. They funded the Secretariat until 2019, and then we transitioned the responsibilities such as quality assurance, partner certification, resource mobilizations over to the respective national governments. And today, each country has a permanent Speed School Secretariat within the Ministry of Education. Speed School is part of the out-of-school strategy, and it's also funded over the national budgets. So Mali, for example, has had funded 1,000 speed schools with the national budget over since 2012. In terms of challenges, ensuring quality, you know, when we have a well-developed model, we're going to scale, we anchored it, you know, this model has been both adopted and adapted also by other development partners. There's been changed, shortened, been 6 months rather than 9 months. These things affect the quality, but then it's not that easy for governments to say no when partners are bringing in funding, for example. Context has changed dramatically in the Sahel since 2004. Insecurity, school closures, internally displaced children, you know, that, but the number of out-of-school children is increasing rather than decreasing. So, you know, the need for these type of flexible approaches is still there. Also, infrastructure and quality in the formal system. So we bring children through the program, but then, you know, it needs the quality in the formal schools also need to be addressed because they can transfer and continue, but then drop out again. So, you know, what we want is for children to complete primary education. And then lastly, also the funding situation, you know, funding for education globally is decreasing, but also security is absorbing increasing amount of the national budget in these countries. So challenging context to work in, and I could mention military coups, but you know, because of this anchoring, that collaboration at the ministerial level has continued, even though there's been changes in regime.
Multiple coups. So, and you actually just provided a wonderful segue into what I wanted to touch on next, and I think I'll begin with Tamara, if you wouldn't mind. And that's when we're looking at supporting ministries in having a more diversified education, flexible education offer, and not just the traditional known way of providing education and the standard sitting at a desk with a teacher in front of you, that has, doesn't work for all children everywhere all the time. What can we do to ensure quality, equity, inclusion, and especially among some of these challenges like reduced financing and the need for ministries to get support and not necessarily say no when there's support coming in, and some of the other challenges that can be faced? So what can we do to ensure the quality while trying to reach the most marginalized with these diversified systems and in integrating them into ministry systems?
Absolutely. I tried to organize my thought in three points or three ideas. So to ensure both quality and equity and inclusion in diversified education program, I think systems need to make three major shifts. And that's how I try to organize. I think I could spend, an hour on this, but I try to shorten it, make it as clear as possible. So my first is from uniformity to flexibility. My second is from fragmentation to integration. And the second is exclusion to intentional inclusion. So first, flexibility must be built with equity at the core. So we talked about a lot of flexible educational pathways, but inclusion needs to be at the very thought from the very beginning. So diversified education means offering multiple learning pathways. We heard about a few, formal, non-formal, remedial, accelerated, community-based, but these options must be designed from the start to reach the most marginalized. For example, girls with disabilities, children affected by conflict, those in remote or rural areas. And for instance, in Madagascar, HI supported bridging classes to help children with disability transition from, specialized schools to inclusive classroom. This is an example of a diversified but equitable solution because it ensures a pathway and, again, not a parallel track. And the second, so quality must be consistent across all pathways. And I think that was really touched on really beautifully by Anne. Too often, alternative models are seen as kind of second best. To prevent this, systems must invest in equivalent teacher training, curriculum standards, and learning assessments across all modalities. In our project, we ensure that, for example, the itinerant teachers or community facilitator receive rigorous, ongoing coaching, and that children are learning according to adapted yet structured educational plans, whether they are in mainstream classroom, a non-formal program, or at home due to mobility barriers, for example. Third, data, accountability, and coordination mechanism are essential. And I think that was already mentioned by both Daniela and Anne as well. Governments need to track who is learning, how, with what outcomes. We've worked with ministries to integrate disability disaggregated data into their data systems and to ensure that local and national actors can coordinate across education, health, and protection sectors. This helps to avoid fragmented services and ensures that every child needs are being met kind of at a holistic level. And I think that's one of the big challenges with out-of-school children, and especially with children with disability, is that they require a multi-sectoral approach, and often government or organized in silos. And that's kind of one of the challenges that we've been facing. Even though, I think there's a language change even at the international corporation sector, or we're talking more and more, for example, about the nexus approach. But we still need to be really responding at a holistic level. And lastly, education system must listen to the learners and the communities in which they implement these projects. Diversification doesn't just mean delivering content in new places. It means designing around the real lives of the children and the students. When we support, for example, children in rural Togo, we learn that inclusive extracurriculars like school clubs, peer tutoring were as important as the formal lessons for retention rates and general well-being of the children. True quality and equity means that we recognize the whole child in its whole context. So to sum up, to secure both quality and equity in diversified program, we need flexibility with inclusion, consistent standard, strong coordination, and that deep local engagement, and that political willness, as we've mentioned so many times. And that's how we make sure that no child is left behind, regardless of whatever pathway they take.
Thank you for that. And I think I would, if you don't mind, and before I transition to Daniela, I would just add that for education above all, we really find it important to not only know who's in school and who's learning and what they're learning, but to also be able to have the data on who should be in school and who's not. Because if we can't count those, if we don't know who's supposed to be in school and who's not, then how are you going to be counted and ensure that you'll be able to have that access to any type of learning opportunity? And with the new data that has recently come out, that there's over 278 million, or 72, million out of school children and youth, and 78 million of those are at the primary level. It's becoming ever more important, or evident, the importance of that accurate data on who should be in school, who is in school, and who's learning and what are they learning. And I think, Tamara, you said something else that really resonates with us, and that's the bringing what the children are coming from, where the children are coming from, and accepting and acknowledging what the children are bringing to the education system, the education program with them, and what their needs are, and the whole ecosystem. Daniela, with that, in the Latin America region, really, what have you found that is working or challenging, or ways that we can ensure quality, equity, and inclusion for the most marginalized when working on a diversified education system, and with the challenges that it comes with in integrating these into ministries?
Okay, I was trying to build my answer right now, and I heard what Anne just mentioned about how do we transition, and I don't know if these were the exact words, but how do we transition from bureaucracy, and how do we make working with governments not only a process, but actually transition to quality. So the first thing that I would say is, I would say that for assuring quality, we should always think in implementation at a scale. We have so many population that needs this kind of programming. So even though there are very interesting initiatives that are all around Latin America and the Caribbean, when these initiatives, and I mentioned the case of Colombia, are growing and are reaching the most part of the children that have this need, I think that is when we can say that this is being successful. The only thing is that governments should not only let this programming operate, but actually assure that the children that are in those kind of programs are getting a certification. So I think that's also very, very relevant. And this means also to support the transitioning into normal formal systems as much as possible. I think that would be the first one. And the second one would be on data. And I would like to mention this because most of the time we don't have enough data of how many children out of school are there and how many children we are losing. So I would like to mention the case, for example, in Chile, they have this system that is in place, but they have an index that is called school vulnerability. So what they do is that they identify social and vulnerable children in schools, and that help them to support decision-making and program implementation. So I think this is a very good practice that could also be bring to the kind of work that we can do with ministries. And finally, I don't know if it has been mentioned, but I would like to say teacher training. there is a lot on the back of the teachers, and we normally build this great programming and then we left them there asking them to do a lot, to working with diverse population, to working with inclusive population, to all these things. So I guess accompanying teachers in flexible models, to being there for them, and also on psychosocial support in many cases. So yeah, those would be my 3 ones. So I would just wrap up very quickly: implementation at scale, data, and teacher training.
Thank you. I'm hearing some common threads throughout that I think that we can all take forward on this. To kind of bring this piece to a summary, do you have anything to add on the question around ensuring that you've touched on it quite a bit, but I just want to make sure that you come in again on ensuring quality, equity, and inclusion when diversifying the education offer and integrating that as diversified models into ministry systems?
Yeah, I think Tamara and Daniela has covered a lot of very important points. I would mention cost effectiveness. So what the models that we develop, if we expect them to be taken up and scaled up, they really need to be cost effective because of the context. I mean, for Stromme Foundation working in the Sahel, but we all know education budgets are under pressure. The other thing is, I mean, just following up a little bit on this flexibility and this adapting to the needs of the learners. So, for example, what we've done with the Speed School program, or what UNICEF actually has done with the Speed School program, is to take that original and then adapt it into the Quranic schools in Burkina Faso. So fitting it in with existing structures. We're also working now more increasingly with internally displaced children in the 3 countries. So we see there that psychosocial support needs to be added into the model. School feeding as well is coming up. You know, these little elements that we build around the children to ensure that they access education and continue. But I also think there's an impetus both to us as development actors as well as government. You know, what Tamara was touching upon of multi-sectoral approaches, that we don't need to do everything ourselves, but identify those partners we can work with. And I think then in that context as well, very important, if you're working to provide access, we also need to improve quality. I mean, they go hand in hand. We can't do one and not the other.
Thank you so much. So we're hearing multi-sectoral approaches, engagement with ministries from the beginning, engagement with the communities, practical solutions, not going it alone. So many themes that are coming across throughout. We do have some questions from the audience and a few others. And so the first question that we have from the audience, I think just really builds off of what we've really already been talking to. So I'm just going to ask maybe lightning round each of you quickly, 30 seconds or more. What else have you found that maybe you haven't touched on yet to be practical solutions and strategies for implementing these education models, given the extremely high number of out-of-school children and youth, and the crises? I'm going to add to the question a little bit, and the crises that we're finding around the world that are actually increasing those numbers. Lightning round, whoever wants to go first. It's open to the panel.
I can go quickly first. 2 just small things I want to mention. First of all, role models. This of around both, you know, whether you're thinking gender, whether you're thinking disability, these of having both as teachers, but also the whole system around that you have role models that the children, depending on their background, can see themselves represented. I think also community involvement. Both in terms of identifying after-school children. I know also with our experience, I'm sure it's the same with humanity and inclusion, we worked with school inclusion teams. So involving the community, identifying, it's not always easy whether it is disabilities, whether they're children that are out of school, as we were saying, where are they? Identifying them. So involving the community in that as well.
And I might jump in on this and kind of not only second what Anna's mentioned, but go a little bit further and say not just community, but parental engagement. One of the strategies we implement, the itinerant teacher model, supports children in school with their individualized education plan, but also can support at home parents in supporting their children that have disabilities, in ensuring that they also provide that quality education at home. And I think that linkage between home and school is often forgotten, and it's very crucial in ensuring sustainable approaches to education.
It's essential to not forget the parents in the community. Thank you for reminding us of that. The next question, Tamara, I think this is really addressed at you, but if others want to come in after, please do feel free. We have a question around strategies and solutions in addressing children who have quote unquote invisible disabilities or learning differences, and what can be done to support them.
So thank you for the question. I think it's very crucial when we talk about disability. It can mean a wide array of things. At HI, we understand disability from not a medical standpoint, but a social one. And it means that we ensure that teachers are trained to provide inclusive pedagogy and approaches to all children, regardless of the disability that they come in. So we don't even need to have children that are diagnosed with disability in the classroom, for example, to ensure that all children all teachers, are equipped to respond to diverse needs. So and at an identification level and community level, we ensure that all children, regardless of disability or not, regardless that they have a diagnosis or not, have access, and we make sure to understand what are the barriers to their access, rather than coming from a standpoint of needing a diagnosis. I don't know if that answers the question, but let me know in the chat if there's more follow-up ones.
Thank you. So we have one more question that's not in the chat, but at the table around me, looking at how can, and whoever would like to just jump in on this, and just really how can we balance the cultural and religious aspects in some of the integration of curriculum and education models into new systems, such as I think Tamara and Anne, you both touched on Quranic schools and the models were, and then there's other cultural issues and potentially religious issues as well in Latin America and the Caribbean that need to be addressed, and how in working to diversify in the education offer so that all children can have access to quality, equitable education, do we balance some of these tensions and other aspects?
Maybe I can really quickly jump in and let Anna and Daniela continue. I think it, all our programming, or all of our strategies, or model, or whatever you need to call them, need to be adapted to each context. So when we implement, for example, the bridging classes or the itinerant teacher model, or any of our other approaches, we work with the communities, whatever that community may be, to ensure that it's actually working and contextualized to the reality. This panel is quite short, so we kind of present that meta level approach as if it's unified, but it's in a practice, it's very differentiated based on context.
And Daniela, I'm just going to give you an opportunity if you want to jump in on any of the questions that have been raised, or any other thoughts or additions to some of this.
Thank you, Sabrina. I think this last question is very interesting. I was actually thinking about our region, which is, of course, very different from what is happening in Africa and Asia. But we do have some interesting examples, especially in the Caribbean, where there are a lot of religious schools that support children with needs. So these schools, they are basically from like several Protestant groups. I cannot even mention, like they have so many. But what they do is that they support the education of the poorest children. And this is something that it's of course, we need to work with that. Not UNICEF, for example, is working very closely with those organizations. And as long as the curriculum is in the right place, as long as the teachers are working with the curriculum, then we can have these spaces of kind of integrated with parallel learning and religious learning, but we need to ensure that the main subjects are included in the education. So basically, yeah, that's example that we have here.
Thank you so much. So I think we've had, it's a short panel and we probably could go on for several hours on each one of these main questions and topics to just really dig into it. And to be honest, we could probably have a webinar on each one of the questions. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, but I would like to ask each of you, Anne, and then Daniela, and then Tamara, in alphabetical order by first name, what are the 3 things, bullet points, that you would want us to take away from today's discussion?
Thank you. I think it's probably in danger of repeating a lot of what's been said, but you know, anchoring at the community as well as government. And I think community involvement and engagement essential. Flexibility, you know, meeting the needs for the learners and the need for collaboration across, you know, both with government and across development actors.
Daniela?
For me, I would say, again, a scale, that's very relevant. Teacher training, and probably, yeah, I mean, I like this word, like flexibility, and quality. What about quality? I think that's a better one.
Tamara, do you want to wrap us up with your 3 or things we should take away from the discussion today?
Absolutely. I don't know if I'll be as succinct in 3 words as Anne and Daniela, but I'll try my best. I think that you know, if we want to transform education system, it kind of requires more than good intention, right? It requires models that are kind of proven, that are data driven. So I think my first word would be, you know, data. For example, in many countries, there's just a real lack of disability disaggregated data at national level. And also, you know, going back to some of the models that I've presented from HI, I think that we've seen that like kind of personalized, flexible, I think seems to be the word that is kind of concluding this this talk. Personalized support and personalized and flexible support mechanism are kind of amongst the most effective for reaching excluded learners, especially when we're talking about children with disability. And I think the last word I'd kind of like to end this on is that scale up. It's that that innovation, regardless of how brilliant it may be, is not enough if it stands outside a national system. And I think that's been repeated several times throughout this this call. And I think that's some really key takeaway that we need to take from this panel. So that would be my last closing.
Thank you. And I think you've done the wrap up for me. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your thoughts, the work that you are all doing on this issue, and the working to ensure that all children have access to quality, equitable education, and that these flexible systems are integrated and become something that is really systematically delivered within countries and adapted by ministries. For the audience, if you want to have some more information about some of the approaches that were talked about today, there are resources on the screen. You can scan the QR codes. And if you want to know more about why the needle hasn't moved on the issue of out-of-school children and the protection of education, Education Above All put out a publication on this topic a couple of years ago that is very relevant to today's issues, and also looks at what we need to do in order to ensure quality, equitable education for all. I thank you for your time. The webinar will also be available on video after today's session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.